All right, except for the witness, everybody have a seat, please. Ma'am, if you would face the clerk and be sworn, please raise your right hand.
You swear affirm testimony about giving this case to be true, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
You have a seat. Good morning, folks. Thank you for being back here this morning. It's really reverberating, and then we can keep my voice down. I don't have control over the volume in this courtroom. It's a little odd. In the courtroom I normally control, I have volume controls right here. So if it seems a little funny on the volume, it's we're going to cut it down. All right. The other day we happened to hit the wrong button and muted a bunch of the speakers, so I'm not touching it anymore. All right. You may proceed, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Judge. Ma'am, can you please state and spell your name for Madam Court Reporter?
Katherine, Katherine, Thomas, Thomas.
Ms. Thomas, do you currently live in Tallahassee?
No,
Where do you live?
I live in North Carolina.
Okay. At some point, did you live in Tallahassee?
Yes,
Did you grow up in Tallahassee?
yes,
Do you know who Mike Williams is?
yes.
How do you know Mike Williams?
I know Mike Williams. We met in elementary school,
Okay. What elementary school?
North Florida Christian.
So how long did you know Mike?
I met him when we were in 5th grade, and so I knew him from then and until he passed away.
Were you friends with Mike?
Yes.
Can you describe that friendship? Were you just friends? Did you ever date? Anything like that?
We were friends. We did date, like went together. You know, when we dated, we couldn't drive, so, but we remained friends throughout, you know, our growing up.
Were you friends after high school?
Yes,
Do you know who Denise Williams is?
yes.
When did you first meet Denise Williams, and what was her name at that point?
I met Denise Merrill in 9th grade at North Florida Christian School. We went to high school together.
Were you friends?
We were friends. We weren't best friends in high school, but we were friends. We cheered together, and it was a small school, so you know, everyone knew each other pretty well, and we were friends.
Okay. Now, did Mike and Denise date in high school?
Yes, they did.
And they eventually got married, is that right?
That's correct.
Do you know who Brian Winchester is?
Yes.
Who's Brian Winchester?
Brian Winchester, I met him in 9th grade, also at North Florida, and we started dating when I was, we were juniors. We were both juniors in high school, and then we eventually got married also.
When did you get married?
We got married in 1994, May of 1994.
Okay. And were Mike and Denise married around that same time frame?
They were married in December, but yes, within the same year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, did y'all do things together
We did.
as couples?
Yes, yes.
Can you describe some of the things that you did together as couples at that point?
Well, we would do things like go out to eat. We would go to movies. You know, the normal, just kind of like, you know, if something, you know, a movie or dinner, you know, just kind of like couple dates type stuff. We
double dating with a
double dating, right? Yes, and we would do both. Brian and Mike would hunt and fish, and so Denise and I would tag along. You know, we would do those sorts of things. Go to the coast and you know, go on a dove hunt or, just things like that. We did couple things like that together.
Now, you and Brian had a son together, is that right?
Yes.
And when was your son born?
He was born in February of 1999.
And Denise and Mike had a daughter.
Correct.
And Ansley was born around the same time as your son?
She was born in May of 99.
Okay. At some point, your marriage to Brian Winchester started to have some problems. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's correct.
You eventually separated.
Correct.
When did you separate?
We separated September 11th, 9/11
Of 2001.
2001. Correct.
Okay. And when did you finally finalize the divorce?
The divorce was final in 2004, April of 2000. April of 2003. I'm sorry.
Ms. Thomas, you're a little nervous today, aren't you?
I am a little bit nervous.
Okay. And this is hard to talk about. Fair?
Yes.
Did you suspect that Brian Winchester, your husband, was having an affair with Denise Williams?
I did suspect that.
I want to take you back to December of 1999. This is before you're separated.
Okay.
Right? Did you receive a phone call from the Tallahassee Police Department?
Yes.
What was that phone call in reference to?
It was in reference to, there was a police officer who was standing at Brian's truck, and she said, ma'am, I'm here, your truck is in this parking lot, and she was just like doing a call, sort of like, this truck is here, and I guess she had looked at the registration and saw that it was ours, and so she was at Brian's truck.
Did she give a description of the truck to you?
She did, because,
And did that match everything down?
yes, I was like, that, it can't be, and she said, well, it has a bumper sticker, this bumper sticker, this bumper sticker, this bumper sticker, and so I was like, well, yes, that is our vehicle.
Well, you just said it can't be. Why couldn't it be Brian's truck?
Brian had told me that he was in Arkansas hunting, and so I was confused as to why she was telling me that she was at the truck, because I had been told by Brian that he was in Arkansas with the truck, hunting.
Now, were you told the location of the truck? Was it at a church?
Yes, it was at a church, Grace Church, or Grace is in the name. I'm not sure the whole.
Generally located, was that close to where Denise Williams was living at the time?
Yes.
Where was Denise Williams living at the time?
She was living at on Centennial Oaks Drive.
I want to fast forward a little bit. Now I want to talk to you about a trip that you took to Panama City. Do you remember a trip like that?
Yes.
Who went on that trip? Actually, let's start with this. Who was supposed to go on that trip?
It was supposed to be the four of us. It was supposed to be me and Brian and Denise and Mike.
What was the purpose of the trip? Why were you going to Panama City?
It was supposed to be like a birthday trip.
Whose birthday were we celebrating?
Denise's 30th birthday.
Okay. And so she was born in 1970, is that right?
Yes.
And so her 30th birthday would have been when?
2000.
Okay. Do you know what month we're talking about that the trip was planned?
It would have been, spring, March or April. I don't know how the weekends would have lined up, but
Springtime of 2000.
correct.
And what was the plan? Were you meeting someplace and driving over together, or what?
The plan was for Mike and Denise to come over to our house on Minnow Creek Drive, and we were going to all drive together over there
And
to Panama City.
did Mike show up?
No.
Did Denise show up?
Yes.
Were you informed that Mike wasn't going?
Yes.
How did that make you feel?
I didn't want to go.
Why?
Because at that point in our lives, whenever it was just me with Brian and Denise, it was uncomfortable. I felt like a third wheel. I felt like I was on a date with the two of them.
So how did you respond to the idea of going to Panama City with Denise and your husband?
I said, if Mike doesn't have to go, I don't have to go either. I didn't want to go. And I had, I guess, sort of a little tantrum, and I ran inside and I locked myself in the bathroom and I said, I'm not going.
But you eventually went.
I did.
Why did you go?
Just because as I was there in the bathroom, they were on the other side just talking me into going.
Okay.
And
So let's talk about the trip itself. When you got there, do you remember going out to clubs?
I do.
Okay. Do you remember going to a strip club?
I do.
Was Brian and Denise both present for that?
Yes.
Did you drink a lot that weekend? Or on that trip?
Yes.
Do you remember having photographs taken of you?
I don't remember specifically the moments but when I saw the photograph, I knew what it was.
Who took the picture?
Brian did.
Do you remember any other details of what happened after those photographs would have been taken?
I don't remember specifically a lot about that weekend.
Now, at some point, did you find some movie tickets?
I did.
Did that increase your suspicion that Brian was having an affair?
Yes, it did.
Where did you find the movie tickets?
I found them in his wallet.
In whose wallet?
I found them in Brian's wallet.
Okay.
I found 2 movie tickets.
What was the movie that the tickets were for?
It was for a movie called The Virgin Suicides.
And just to be clear, are these used tickets or tickets that you bought beforehand?
They were used tickets,
Okay.
and I knew I had not gone to see the movie, so it was like
That raised your suspicions?
yes, it was like,
Okay. What does the name Meridian mean to you?
Meridian is a name that when we would go out, it was a name that kind of became a party name for Denise.
Okay. Who came up with the name?
I cannot remember specifically whose idea it was. She lived on Meridian Road at that time, and we had gone to a concert at the Moon, and at the end of the concert, you could go up to the band and they would sign a CD or whatever, and that night, she had them, she was like, oh, say to Meridian, so they signed it. I remember them signing it to her, and so it just kind of became,
So you've seen Denise use the name Meridian before.
yes.
Did you ever find a receipt that referenced the name Meridian?
I did.
Can you tell the jury where you found that receipt?
I had gone into Brian's office, and this is when I was contemplating what my next steps would be as far as moving out. We didn't have bills sent to our house. He would have all of our bills sent to his office. So I had gone to his office one evening, and I was just looking through his desk drawers, just trying to find out information about our financial life.
And you came across the receipt?
And I came across the receipt.
Judge, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Ms. Thomas, I'm going to show you on the mark in State's Exhibit 20. Is this the receipt that you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Is that a fair and accurate copy of that receipt?
Yes, it is.
Judge, I would offer State's Exhibit 20 into evidence at this time.
Any objection?
A little more foundation on the date of the receipt, Your Honor.
Sure, Your Honor. There's a date on the receipt. What is the date on that?
It says 07/28/01.
Is that during the time that you just testified to?
Yes.
Judge, I would offer State's Exhibit 20.
Further objection? I didn't hear.
No objection.
All right, it'll be admitted without objection.
Permission to close, Your Honor?
You may.
And Ms. Thomas, this is obviously a copy, and we can't flip over the first part of the receipt, is that right?
That's correct.
Judge, do you have
I do.
Can you point out the date of the area that the date is found?
Right there.
Okay. Where was this receipt from? May I approach the witness, please?
You may.
I know it's kind of hard to read it.
It's from the Gold Center.
I didn't hear you.
The Gold Center.
And you were able to actually at one point look at the entire receipt. Is that fair?
Yes.
What was the receipt for?
It was for a necklace, and it was during a time when it was kind of popular to have a name on a gold name, and it was the name Meridian. It was like a necklace with the name Meridian. So I knew what that was, and that's what the receipt was for one of those necklaces.
And that date is the late July of 2001.
Correct.
That's before you separated from Brian Winchester, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you separated from Brian Winchester approximately about a month after that. A month and a half.
Right. Mm-hmm.
She's trying to take down what you say, so
Oh,
if you'll say yes or
yes.
no, it'll
Okay.
assist her, please.
I'm sorry.
And ultimately you divorced Brian Winchester.
Yes, sir.
I want to fast forward now to August of 2016. Were you aware that Brian Winchester kidnapped Denise Williams, who was then Denise Winchester?
Yes.
Okay. After that occurred, did you have conversations with Denise Williams about what occurred?
Yes.
About a week after that incident, that kidnapping, did Denise ask you to do something?
Yes.
What did she ask you to do?
Denise asked me to tell Marcus to get a message to Brian that I'm not talking.
And that was a week approximately after the kidnapping.
Yes.
Sometime after that, did you start communicating with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yes.
Let me go back. Who's Marcus?
Marcus is Brian Winchester's father, Marcus Winchester.
Okay. When you say, I'm not talking, is it referring that Kathy Thomas is not talking or Denise Williams is not talking?
That Denise was not talking. She wanted me to tell Marcus to tell Brian that she wasn't talking. And she said, I'm not talking. But that was her saying that to me.
Okay. After that, at some point, did you start having communications with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE?
Yes.
Was there anyone in particular that you started communicating with?
William Michler and Mike Devaney.
And at some point after that, did you agree to start working as a confidential source?
Yes, I did.
As part of that, were you given a way to make recordings?
Yes.
After that, did you ever confront Denise about what she asked you to do that week after the kidnapping?
Yes, I did.
Did you record that conversation?
Yes, sir.
Judge, may I approach?
You might.
Ms. Thomas, I'm showing you one of Mark State's Exhibit 16. This is a recording. Did you have a chance to review this in our office before your testimony today?
Yes.
Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the recording that you made?
Yes.
Judge, I would offer State's Exhibit 16 into evidence at this time.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
It'll be admitted.
Permission to publish, Your Honor.
You may.
And I'm headed over to my mom's I've got a test tonight, and so I'm going to study and eat over there, and people are going to be coming in and out, so I'm just going to go be over there until tonight. So you're driving back, so does that mean Rex is worse, or you were headed back anyway, or?
Well, I was headed back anyways, but this way, if if Rocky needs to come, he can.
Yeah. And you got the...
I think we ought to have her identify who's talking so the jury can follow it a little bit better.
There's two people on this recording, is that right?
Yes.
One voice is yours,
Yes.
and who's the other voice?
Denise.
Saying right, it wasn't there,
I
right?
did. I got the ring. It was in my purse.
Lisa Lovell would not shut up, so I couldn't even talk to you. I was just like, okay, I'll just stick it in your purse.
Hang on one second. I just got in the car. I just stopped to get coffee. Let me get...
That person who just said, I just got in the car, I just got to get coffee, whose voice is that?
That was me.
Okay, so the other voice is Denise.
That's right.
All right. Okay, so I am... It's starting to mist again. This is going to be like a miserable drive. So I'm kind of freaking out about this subpoena.
I'm sure. When is it?
It's February 22nd.
Person who was talking about a subpoena, that was your voice, right?
Yes.
And the person who said, I'm sure, that's Denise Williams' voice.
That's correct.
When you're talking about a subpoena, what are you talking about?
Well, as one of the things that, as a confidential source, that William Michler, we were going to say that I had received a subpoena so that that was going to be a subpoena for me to have to talk to Mr. Devaney about, the case. I had received a subpoena from Mike Devaney, and this was all under the.
That never happened.
That never happened. That was part of being the confidential source.
That's how we're getting everything to
Correct.
bring up the subject.
To bring up the subject, correct. For me to talk to her and say, I have received this subpoena, I'm going to have to talk about this, and this conversation is us talking about what I'm going to be saying in that supposed subpoena.
Okay.
Come back to it. Like, you don't have, you have to travel, and they can't do it there, all that kind of stuff.
The attorney that I talked to, he's just like a mortgage attorney.
Yeah.
So he said, he's like, I could call. He's like, I don't do this, but I could call and see if you could do it over. He's like, you would have to go somewhere where you would get sworn in, because the whole thing is like getting sworn in.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, well, just let me kind of figure out what I'm going to do.
Because Andy had said that to you. Remember when you were going to get deposition? Yeah. That was a subpoena too.
Right.
But I don't know if they ever did it. But.
No, they didn't ever do it.
I just can't imagine that. What if somebody lived in Alaska or in another country, or I don't know, whatever.
Well, here's my problem, and I'm gonna get upset here, but my problem is that I can't really talk to Rocky about any of this.
Mm-hmm.
Who's Rocky?
He's my husband, my current husband.
All right. Thank you.
Because I know they're wanting to talk to me about Mike. And over the time that we've been married, I've always just pretended like I don't know anything. And I do know.
What do you know?
Well, do you remember back when all of that happened with you and Brian and Chuck in Atlanta?
Yeah.
Well, Brian called me at the shop crying and
Before or after?
mad. Well, I don't know, because I didn't know that all of that had happened until Chuck wrote me a letter.
Uh-huh.
But Brian had figured out that you were cheating on him with Chuck. And he just told me about Mike.
What did he say? He called you upset about Chuck, and then he wanted to talk about Mike.
He was mad at you.
Mm-hmm.
And so he told me about what happened to Mike.
Well, I would love to know what happened to Mike. He never told me. They said they found his remains and that he was beaten or that he was shot.
Brian told me that y'all planned it.
Planned what? Oh my gosh.
And Marcus showed up at the shop later that afternoon, telling me how I would have to take this to my grave, that it would ruin Stafford's life, it would ruin, apparently Brian told Marcus that he had talked to me, and he went on to just tell me, Marcus went on to tell me how my life would be ruined, how I would never be able to start over, if Stafford's life was ruined, if...
So Marcus knew? And when you said Brian said y'all, you're talking about me and Brian or Marcus or who?
You and Brian. And whenever...
And that Marcus is involved? I mean, obviously, if he came and talked to you.
Well, it was
Marcus
just
never
the
talked to
whole, shut down. So, whenever, I mean, it's.
And then you got a letter from Chuck. My parents got a letter too. But you got a letter from Chuck, and he's talking about it too, or no?
Chuck told me what happened in Atlanta.
In Atlanta, okay, yeah.
So, here's the deal. Here is the deal. Hang on, somebody's texting me. It's Rocky. Rex is not doing well.
Oh. But yeah, that's pretty major, especially with Marcus involved.
Well, I mean, I know that you know something, Denise, because whenever I was going out to see Marcus, you're like, tell Marcus to tell Brian I'm not talking.
Yeah.
And I knew what that meant.
Well, that's why, because what they've been doing is they've been lying to me and they've been lying to them. And obviously, I mean, because you told me the thing about him saying what I wrote in the letter to the judge, which I didn't. And so they're playing everybody against each other.
Here's the thing. I don't even care about all that anymore because time has moved on. Mike is in heaven. So here is my problem. Here is my problem is Rocky doesn't know any of this. Rocky doesn't know that I know in all these years, anytime anything ever came up about Mike, I just sit with my mouth shut. He never would have married me if he had known.
This has nothing to do with you.
It has everything. I've been lying to him for 15 years.
But you're talking about something Chuck happened years later. So then you're saying that years later, Brian told you something, Marcus came to you, so two people came to you to talk to you about this years after it happened. Had you met Rocky then?
Yes.
I mean, but what that has to do with is two people telling you something. That has nothing to do with you and anything that you did or anything that you didn't do. I mean, it doesn't. And there's nothing you can't tell Rocky. I know that. I'm sure of that. So that's why you were talking about losing your family.
I am going to lose my family. If I lie, whenever they ask me, do you know what happened to Mike? If I lie, then now what happens? And then when I go home and Rocky says, why didn't you ever say anything? Like, how do I explain that? How do I explain that I just decided to forget it? He never would have married me.
I don't believe that. But because you didn't, it has nothing to do with
Because he hates lying.
Well,
I've never lied to him about anything, but every time that anything comes up about Mike, that is a lie.
that you you didn't tell him what Brian told you, and you
Right.
didn't tell him what Marcus told you.
Right.
So again, it's two things that two people told you, but it's not you. It's not he fell in love with you. It's not you.
Well, what am I supposed to do when they ask me?
I mean,
What am I supposed to do?
was he pushing? He was pushing you on the phone about it. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. Rocky's like, why do you have this? Why do they want to talk to you?
I mean, my guess was because you were married to Brian at the time. You knew Brian. I'm guessing that. I don't know. I mean, if all this is tied to this guy that he talked to, then I'm guessing he wanted to talk to you because you were friends with us. But I mean, but again, it has nothing to do with Rocky or your girls or your family. Nothing. They weren't even around then, and you weren't either. This is years later. Because I'm trying to think. It was at least 3 years later. When I was with Chuck. And I mean, Rocky's not gonna... Stuff that you kept inside that people have told you. If you decide to tell him, he's going to be fine. If you don't, he's not going to, you're not going to, he's not going to be like, we're getting a divorce. I mean, there's no way. There's no way. And if you would have told him back then when y'all were engaged or getting engaged or whatever, it had nothing to do with him meeting you, him falling in love with you, him wanting to marry you, your family. It has to do with Brian and Marcus. You know what I'm saying? So it's February 22nd, is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
And is it a trial? Because it said a witness something. I didn't understand what that term meant. Because I've got subpoenas before for depositions.
It's at home. I don't have it with me. It just says that, like, I have to go down to the state attorney's office at 10 o'clock in the morning.
The state attorney. Yeah, because I think that's where I have to go to. And you and Marcus, have y'all ever spoken since? Has he ever said anything to you since?
No. It's just been understood that, if I ever said anything, then everything, all the stupid shit we ever did, everybody would know, and
Yeah.
everybody would know, and wouldn't that be awful, and, Mike's in a better place, and so, but I don't know.
I mean, him saying all that to you, again, that's using fear and the unknown to try to control you. I mean, it's typical,
Denise, I'm just going to ask you this because I've been thinking about it, but, not long before he called me. Mike called me. And he had found a bunch of money in your wallet.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I think Denise has a boyfriend. He said he found a bunch of money in your wallet. a bunch of cash. And he said that you told him something about Deanna, that you told him that Deanna had paid you back for something, and he said that he had asked Deanna, and Deanna said that wasn't true.
Yeah, I remember all that.
But I remember thinking, like, he knows that Denise and Brian like each other. And, like, I've always thought to myself, if I had said, Mike, I think Brian has a girlfriend, I've always wondered if he would still be here. Like, why couldn't y'all just get a divorce? I've always known that you and Brian loved each other. Brian told me one time that you were his best friend, and that was just the way it was always going to be. Did Mike find out?
No, that was all. I remember him calling Deanna. I'm pretty sure he told me that he had called you. But I know for sure he called Deanna because we talked about it. And I remember the conversation. I don't remember. I remember us talking about it. I remember that we were talking about Carol because of, like, the pot and stuff like that. I remember talking about that with him. And I think Carol ended up talking to him because and I don't remember how much money it was. I don't remember. I do remember money, and I do remember a conversation about pot and Carol and Deanna. And I remember that he had talked to Deanna too, so I had to tell her about all that. But so I do remember that. Yeah, I guess I didn't know that he had talked to you, but. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I can't do anything with I couldn't do anything with the divorce. I couldn't do anything with any of this without talking to an attorney. And mainly, I just talk with Becky's husband and then whoever Kristen tells me to talk to. But I don't know. I mean, that's all up to you. And telling Rocky too is up to you. But again, I don't see him. I just see him being like, oh my God, and I don't see him being like, we're getting a divorce. And surely you don't see that.
I do see that because I just know that, like, every year if it comes up and, if there's something in the paper, and then I just know, like, I know he would have said, why didn't you ever tell me? That's how he is, because he is good and honest. He's not like us. He's good and honest. And he will just say, if you've kept this from me, what else? But if I go to the interview and I'm just like, I don't know anything. I mean, what if they catch me lying? And then what happens?
I have no idea. I mean, they told me that day that Brian did all that to me. They told me that we've been talking to Brian, and he's been saying this, that, or the other. I mean, they told me all kinds of crap. And come to find out, one of the attorneys told me that they went in there to talk to him because they had found him, and they went in there to talk to him, and that Jansen was already there, and he didn't say one word. So, I don't know. So what my point in telling you that is, they could say, oh, we know they can say whatever they want to say, and it's legal for them to do that. So whether they ever say, we know you're lying, or we whatever, I mean, you don't know. You have no idea if it's true or not, because I usually find out later what's the actual truth. And the guy asked me about you, but he just asked me about our relationship or whatever. That guy Mike, when he was fishing me. when he came there and started questioning.
When you went into the police?
Yeah, but I mean, it was just, what was your relationship and stuff like that. It wasn't anything about Marcus's name didn't come up or anything like that. Well, I'm sure I would guess if they are doing this to you, they're doing this to Marcus. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know, but I'm thinking that when I get back, I'm going to get just they called me while I was in town. I don't know how they know I was in town.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to get just like a throwaway phone. Because, God, who knows? I mean, I don't know. I'm just scared. I just feel like, why do they keep calling me? Like calling me this weekend and left a message that they knew I was in town. So I think that they're listening to me.
Probably. I mean, I don't know, but they could be. I don't know. I mean, my advice to you is to talk to Rocky.
I can't. I cannot do that. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't even have a job.
I just don't think it's going to be what you think it's going to be. I really don't. And I don't know how you can be married to him for the next how many years and not say anything if it's bothering you that bad.
It wasn't bothering me until I got a subpoena, until I have to do it.
Yeah. That's the only thing I can think of. And I think he would, then it could be him helping you, you know. I mean, I don't think that he would be like, goodbye.
It is starting to rain hard. I'm going to have to go for a second. I'm going to have to go.
But I mean, after hearing all this, that's what I think. And I think that you're wrong. I think you're right about him being a kind, good person. And I think that these are things that people told you years after Mike died. I don't think he's gonna be like, we're getting divorced, I'm never talking to you again. I really don't. But you know better. But I just don't.
I'm going to pull over here.
Be careful, my
All
goodness.
right, yeah, I got to go.
Okay,
All
be
right,
careful.
all
Bye-bye.
right.
That other voice on the tape is Denise Williams, right?
Yes,
Do you see Denise Williams in the courtroom today?
yes, I do.
Can you point her out and identify an article of clothing that she's wearing?
Yes, she's right over here to the right of me, and she's wearing a gray sweater.
May the record reflect that the witnesses identified the defendant, Denise Williams. Nothing further.
Cross.
Good morning, Ms. Thomas.
Good morning.
In the tape recording we just heard, was it FDLE's idea for you to cry and be upset? Is that natural?
I don't remember having it. I don't understand the question, I guess.
Well, you indicated that FDLE had set you up with a little bit of a script about having a subpoena.
Correct?
Told you as an investigative source to make calls to Denise Williams.
Yes.
During this course of time that you were doing that, how many times did you talk with Denise Williams on the phone prior to recording that particular call?
As a confidential source or just in general, do you mean?
Just in general. How often would... Let me help you out here. Let's just pick a narrow time frame. Let's say beginning January 1 of this year, 2018. Okay?
Okay.
As I understand it, this phone call was recorded when? Sometime in February of 2018?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's just begin with January 1. How many times do you think you would have spoken with Denise Williams on the telephone prior to this recorded call?
Probably every day.
Would you also have texted back and forth?
Yes.
Did you talk about the same types of things that you talk about? Your husbands, getting coffee, driving?
Yes.
How many times did you record all of those conversations?
I cannot remember specifically how many I recorded.
But it was more than one?
Yes, sir.
And you sent all of those recordings to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
I'm not sure that I understand every one of our everyday conversations or every one of the recorded conversations.
Well, let's start with the recorded conversations.
Oh, yes, I gave all of those to FDLE. Yes, sir.
How many of those do you think there were?
I think there were maybe 4 to 6.
And those were all the conversations that were scripted out by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to lie to Ms. Williams that you had received the subpoena when in fact you had not.
When I was working for FDLE, yes, sir.
So it would be fair to say when you were making these calls with Ms. Williams while working for FDLE, you were at least lying in part about what was actually going on.
Yes.
And that phone call speaks for itself, so the jury's heard it and they can hear it again. So I'm not going to get into what everybody said, what you said, only to suggest that was Denise is your friend, isn't she?
Yes.
And as that phone call was ending, she was trying to be your friend. She was telling you to be safe, wasn't she?
Yes, sir.
And you two probably talked the day after that phone call, didn't you?
Yes.
Now, you testified on direct examination that you suspected that Brian Winchester and Denise Williams were having an affair. You suspected that.
Yes, sir.
But you don't know that, do you?
I never caught them kissing, or I never saw with my own eyes them specifically in a physical embrace. No, sir, I never caught them.
You don't know if they were having an affair as a fact.
I never caught them in the act. That is correct. That is a fact.
You had talked about, Brian was a selfish husband, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
And you were having a troubled relationship with Brian Winchester well before your separation in September of 2001, correct?
Yes, sir.
And isn't it fair to say that in 2000 you were basically sleeping in a different room from Mr. Winchester?
Yes, sir, that's fair to say.
You were either sleeping in Stafford's room or you were sleeping on the couch. Remember that?
Yes.
You had mentioned earlier that you had some suspicions about Brian. Do you know who Angela Stafford is?
I do know who she is.
Did you ever learn that Angela Stafford and your then husband Brian Winchester had gone out to Clayman Plaza after Denise's baby shower?
Can you repeat that, please?
Did you know that, do you remember when Denise had her baby shower? Grandson.
I'm sure I was there. I'm not, at whose house was it at? I think she may have had a couple.
Do you ever recall having or attending a baby shower for Miss Williams at the home on Centennial Oaks?
I don't have a recollection of that. Specifically, did something happen at the baby shower?
Ma'am?
He'll ask you another question this time.
Okay.
All right. So you don't know if your then husband was out seeing or going out to clubs with other women other than your circle of friends? You don't.
I had not caught him doing that either. I mean, I can't say because I don't know. I don't want to say he wasn't because I don't know, but I can't say that he was either.
Well, Ms. Thomas, we're here in a felony trial. My client's on trial. You've testified during direct examination. You've answered the government's questions. I'm trying to figure out what you know and what you're guessing.
Answer a question, Mr. Way. I don't
Do you
perceive
know
that the witness has avoided your question. Ask a question.
Right. Do you know for a fact whether or not Brian Winchester was cheating on you when you were married to him?
No.
The virgin suicide movie receipt, do you know for a fact whether or not that has anything to do with Denise Williams?
Brian told me that he took Denise to the movie.
Do you think that going to the movie has anything to do or proves in any way they were having an affair?
I didn't know he was going to take her to the movie beforehand, and he did it without telling me, and he told me later that it was her that he had taken. So I guess no, it doesn't prove anything. He just took someone else on a date without me knowing, but I guess I can't.
And when was that movie?
To be honest, I would have to Google to see when it came out. I don't remember. I'm sorry.
You testified earlier that you went to Panama City for Denise's 30th birthday party and you struggled with it because it was a difficult time. You didn't want to go.
Correct.
You've seen the photographs from the state attorney's office that have been introduced into evidence of you and Miss Williams at the beach and you and Miss Williams at the club.
No,
May I first witness, Your Honor?
Amen.
Thomas, I'm going to show you what's been introduced into evidence as State's Exhibit 17, positive exhibit. Several photographs. Please review these. Please do not answer or say anything until you've had an opportunity to review those. Ms. Thomas, are those photographs from that weekend trip to Panama City in 2000?
yes, sir.
And do those pictures accurately depict you in those photographs?
Yes, sir.
And is that you and Miss Williams smiling and staying next to each other in a bikini?
Yes, sir.
Does that depict you and Miss Williams smiling out at nightclubs?
Yes, sir.
Does that depict you and Miss Williams essentially just having a good time as two friends?
Yes, sir.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Amen.
Ms. Thomas, when you were making these controlled calls as it relates to my client's women, you had learned from the Department of Law Enforcement that Mike Williams' remains had been found, correct?
No, sir. I didn't know that at the time of the controlled calls.
You were not aware that in December of 2017 there was a press release and Florida Department of Law Enforcement announced that they had found Mike Williams' remains and reclassified the case as a homicide?
I'm sorry. Yes, sir, I did know that. Wait a second. Can you tell me the date of when the press conference was?
Ma'am, unfortunately,
Okay.
let me try another question that might help. It's not, I'm trying to be evasive, it's not my...
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be evasive either, but I'm just trying.
Did you learn, all right, you have a son by Brian Winchester, correct?
Yes.
And that means you have a connection to Marcus Winchester because that is your son's grandfather.
Yes, sir.
You are aware that your former husband and the father of your son kidnapped Denise Williams at gunpoint on August 5th, 2016, correct?
Yes, sir.
You know that.
Yes.
And you know that from not only your own personal experience, but you also spoke with Denise Williams that day, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you have spoken with Denise Williams constantly or fairly continuously after August 5th of 2016, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And these could be almost considered daily phone calls or text messages.
Yes, sir.
So you would have known in August of 2016 that your former husband was in jail and was facing felony charges.
I knew he was in jail, yes.
And you also knew, and I believe it's referenced on your phone call, you also knew that Special Agent Mike Devaney had spoken with Denise Williams at the Leon County Sheriff's Office when she was there to talk about her kidnapping. You recall that?
I do recall that, but she did tell me that there was someone there, but not right away.
Did you later, in your communications with Ms. Williams, become aware that the FDLE agent she spoke to on August 5th, 2016 was Agent Mike Devaney?
Yes.
And you learned about this shortly after, or did it take time before you and her discussed specifically Agent Devaney?
It took some time before we discussed him.
But it became some point in your communication that you and she could identify who these people were.
No, we never really had, we just knew the one, Mike Devaney.
And isn't it true that she told you she did not have a good relationship or positive feeling about Mr. Devaney after the way she was questioned on August 5th?
She said he was mean to her.
Okay. She said some other things too, probably over the course.
She might have. I mainly remember her saying that he was mean to her.
And that's also why there's some, so you know from your previous communications with her, when you're talking about Agent Devaney on that controlled call, you know there's a history between those two, and you already know that Ms. Williams doesn't like Agent Devaney.
Correct.
There are things in that recording, again, the recording speaks for itself, but the name Charles Bunker comes up in there. There's a whole confusing stuff about Charles Bunker, but who is Charles Bunker?
He was a man that Denise had worked with, and I guess she had dated him.
Did she date him about the same time that you were getting formally divorced from Mr. Winchester?
Approximately.
And their relationship was open and notorious. People knew that they were dating, or you knew that Denise and Charles Bunker were dating.
Well, I had found that out from Brian. She and I were not communicating a lot after I had separated from Brian. Our relationship was not very close for a couple of years around that time, so I knew that from Brian. And, we weren't talking, during that time, we weren't talking on a daily basis like we were currently.
Would it be fair to say that your relationship with Miss Williams became closer after she filed for divorce from Brian Winchester?
Yes.
And that would put you two in the Brian Winchester Ex-Wives Club together?
Yes.
Did she have many of the same, did she talk with you about many of the same concerns she had trying to divorce Brian Winchester as you had?
Yes.
Couldn't get documents?
Correct.
Brian Winchester didn't want to say no, didn't want to give up?
Correct.
And in fact, when you went through and finally got your divorce from Mr. Winchester, I believe the final hearing was right here in this courthouse, wasn't it?
Correct.
And if I recall correctly from previous testimony, in your own knowledge, Mr. Winchester sat one row behind you and cried.
Correct.
But to be fair, Mr. Winchester never really tried any reconciliation attempts with you, did he?
No.
He just didn't want you to be divorced from him.
Correct.
And then once you got your finalized divorce and you were no longer married to Mr. Winchester, you started a relationship with your current husband, Mr. Thomas.
Correct.
Right. And Brian didn't like that, did he?
No.
Did he try to stop your marriage to Mr. Thomas?
He did.
So as soon as you became engaged or romantically involved with another man, Mr. Winchester's efforts to try to bring you back intensified.
Yes.
Because up until the divorce, he hadn't really cared.
That is correct.
Now, you were finally able to marry Mr. Thomas in 2004?
Yes.
And thereafter, Mr. Winchester and Mr. Williams and Miss Winchester got married. 2005, correct?
I think that, yes. I believe it was around 2005.
When the relationship with you and Miss Williams, that tended to get better after their marriage because Miss Williams was now essentially your son's stepmom, correct?
That's right.
And you had more communication now and more contact with Miss Williams because this is before the Ex-Wives Club, correct?
Correct.
Now you're just in the co-parenting club.
Correct.
And Denise was good to Stafford, wasn't she?
Yes.
She looked after him?
Yes.
And isn't it true even after, well, let me ask you a question. As part of your divorce agreement with Mr. Winchester back in 2003, was Mr. Winchester obligated to provide private school tuition?
Yes, sir.
And as Stafford grew older, he ended up attending the McClay School, correct?
Yes.
He went to high school at McClay.
Yes.
Now, about the time he started high school at McClay was about the same time that Miss Williams and Mr. Winchester separated, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you know in your review of the circumstances related to your son whether or not Miss Williams actually paid Stafford's tuition at McClay?
That was what she had told me. But I never, I wasn't on the financial part, so I can't say who paid, but that is what she told me, yes.
And Stafford's tuition ended up being paid.
Yes.
And this was at a time when she wasn't even in a ongoing relationship with Mr. Winchester. She was trying to get divorced from him.
Yes.
Finally, when you were working with the Department of Law Enforcement in February of 2018, that was before you found out conclusively that your former husband had killed Mike Williams, wasn't it?
May I just kind of present a timeline how I'm remembering it, though I can't like remember the verbatim dates? There was the kidnapping, and I started working with FDLE around the time that Brian was sentenced, like after his sentencing. So, yes, that's correct. I'm sorry it took me a minute, but yes, at the time that I recorded the phone calls, I had known that Mike had been found.
Well, let me try to back up a little bit, because I'm asking more, not necessarily when Mike was found, I'm asking when you found out that Brian was the man who in fact killed Mike Williams.
I found that out on the day that the press conference happened.
And
Because when... Should I keep going? I'm sorry.
All right, I'm going to try to lead it a little bit better.
Okay.
Just to help you out a little bit. There was a press conference in December of 2017. Mr. Fuchs was there along with FDLE agents. Do you recall that press conference?
Yes, sir.
And at that press conference, it was announced that Mike Williams' remains had been discovered. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
But it did not say at that press conference who killed Mike Williams, did it?
No, sir. You're right. I'm sorry.
All right. After the press conference, you work with FDLE in February of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, ma'am, I'm going to need you to answer yes or no for the court order, please.
Yes.
Did FDLE, during this time you were working with them, ever tell you that they knew that your former husband, Brian Winchester, had actually killed Mike Williams?
Yes. They told me what his testimony was. They told me what he said he had done.
And they told you that before you started working on recording the phone calls?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Ms. Thomas, you would agree with me that affairs, especially when you're married, are meant to be kept secret. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
And you don't know that your then husband, Brian Winchester, was having an affair with Denise Williams because you never caught them red-handed.
That's correct.
But you had some pretty high suspicions about him. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
And we talked about the recorded calls and the number of recordings. Are the number of recordings that you made, does that change the context of the recording that was played for the jury? The call that was played for the jury, does that change based on how many other recordings that you made with Miss?
No, that was the recording.
The day-to-day calls where you just called and you were talking to your friend about day-to-day life, do those change the content or the context of the recording that the jury heard today?
No, they don't.
Whether you were working off of a script or not, does that change the context or the content of the call that the jury heard today?
No.
Nothing further.
Hey, juror, I have a question of this witness. All right, write your question down, please. We got a sidebar. Ms. Thomas, we have a couple of follow-up questions from the jury. The first one relates back to the date that Mr. Mike Williams disappeared, December 16, 2000. Do you have any recollection from that time frame that stuck out to you concerning either Miss Williams or Mr. Winchester's behavior or interaction? Anything specific that stood out to you from that date or close to that date?
Any behavior that I saw between the two of them?
Or individually?
Or individually? I can't recall any specific action, and should I say just that day specifically?
I think that's what the jury was
Okay.
asking about. Do you remember
Yeah,
what happened?
I don't have any specific on that day. I did not see Denise. I had a phone call from her telling me, it was around lunchtime, she was telling me she was looking for him. And Brian, so I did not see her on that day. Brian, he came late to our family Christmas party. He, in my mind, in the moments on that day, I was wrapping Christmas presents, and the plan was that he would get back from hunting and we would leave and go together to my family Christmas party in Cairo, Georgia. And around 2 o'clock, I just left with Stafford because we were supposed to be there at 3. And Brian showed up later. He showed up after we had opened presents and everything like that. And there was, in that moment, it just seemed as if Mike had gone hunting and just hadn't come back. I didn't see
So there wasn't anything unusual about Mr. Winchester's behavior that you remember other than being late for the party?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have you ever physically met Angela Stafford?
I believe so. I believe that we would have met at, and I know who she is, but she was not someone who was someone that, and back then, you didn't have Facebook and things like that where you might recognize someone even though you didn't see them a lot. I feel that I would have met her. I know that I must have met her, but we were just acquaintances.
Okay. Did Miss Williams appear emotionally distraught about the disappearance of her husband? And we're talking about now back in late 2000, early 2001.
She did not seem distraught. In those days after Mike was gone, I can remember saying to Brian,
I think you've answered the question. Any follow-up, Mr. Rogers?
No, sir.
Any follow-up, Mr. White?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you can step down.
yes, sir.
Call your next witness.
I just not say the question.
Okay. All right, let the jury step out. We'll take 5 minutes and take up motions.